amount what the role of a token in a blockchain is? Okay, even less. Okay, because let's try and cover these things. The timer is not running. Is that on purpose? Otherwise, I don't, like, I have an infinite amount of time. Maybe you can have it running. Thanks. And the pointer is not working. Oh, all right. Initial coin offerings. ICOs stand for initial coin offerings, and they seem to have brought this new generation of crowdfunding or crowd investing, the next generation crowdfunding or crowd investing. This is not my presentation. I don't know what's happening here. Is there another? Guys, I really worked hard on this presentation. This sucks. Is there another pointer? Okay, ICOs. What is an ICO? Basically, ICOs have become the standard for blockchain developers who want to create a new blockchain or a new decentralized application on the blockchain to raise funds for their projects. And by issuing the tokens that are inherent to the blockchain or to the application running on top of a blockchain. And this is done, and that's important to understand, entirely peer-to-peer, actually on a blockchain, which means that you or teams can issue tokens, native tokens of their products, peer-to-peer directly to people who want to invest into their projects. They don't need a bank in between, they don't need a platform like Kickstarter in between, and they don't need venture capitalists or any kind of institutions in between. So this is pretty amazing. Basically, it's very important to understand what a token is, and I think that there is very little understanding about the role of a token in a blockchain environment. I'd like to describe it as a currency for distributed internet tribes. What do I mean by that? So blockchain started almost 9 years ago now with Bitcoin. And the idea of Bitcoin was to be money without banks and the bank managers. And a lot of people think Bitcoin is this peer-to-peer cash thing, it's highly volatile, maybe I can make some money with it. It's money. Yes, it's money, but it's much more. Why was Bitcoin so revolutionary, or is so revolutionary? Because what Bitcoin did, what Satoshi did when writing the white paper, is design this technology we now call blockchain that enabled us to move away from the world we live in now, which is a world of data monarchy, I'd like to call it, where data is stored centrally on one device and files are sent from device to device, to a world where we reinvent data structures now that, given that we have the internet, given that computers are not standalone anymore, and we reinvent data structures, we make the data structures more decentralized. And blockchain is quite revolutionary. It combines three concepts that we've had for a while, peer-to-peer networks with cryptography, but it introduces a new aspect, and it's the economic incentives that make sure that this peer-to-peer network works as it's supposed to be. So in today's world, if I would send you money, I don't know you. Let's say you buy something on eBay from me, or I buy something from you, I have to send you money. Usually we pay through a bank or PayPal, which is also a bank. So we need that trusted third party that will check whether I actually have the money and you are actually you. And for that we pay service fees to the banks or services we use. Bitcoin created the system, the blockchain, that allows us to not have to trust a bank, but we can trust the code, and the code runs on all computers that are part of the Bitcoin network. And if the majority of the computers say yes, the transaction is true, Sherman has 1 Bitcoin, and that address really exists, then the transaction is automatically enforced, and that's quite revolutionary. Now, this rule of code, so is quite amazing because it allows us to move away from trusting entities, and we only have to trust the code. The code is open source, and the computers automatically enforce it. And the killer application here is the smart contract, which is automatically enforced. But how do we make sure, and I have to go back to this slide, how do we make sure that actually all the network participants behave correctly? And we make sure by incentivizing them through economic incentive mechanisms. Miners who were responsible for validating transactions, they can make money by creating or by mining Bitcoin. And this is a very new concept, and we call it crypto economics. It's a very new, Bitcoin is not only electronic money, it introduced a new wave of economy, which is referred to as crypto economics. And these crypto economic rules, the rule sets are tied, or are an integral part of the token. Let's get forward. So basically, tokens are a very important part of the incentive scheme of how distributed networks work. How do we align the interests of people who do not know and do not trust each other? And we do that around economic incentivization, because this is the least common denominator. We replace management with code. And with that, and Bitcoin is the oldest use case for that, we can disrupt organizations. If you look at how organizations work nowadays, whether they're for-profit or non-profit, whether they're governmental or private, organizations most of the time are organized top-down. There is one legal entity, for-profit, non-profit, whatever, and within that legal entity you have contracts regulating the terms of conditions of how your employees work for you, what they have to deliver, and how much money they get. Bitcoin works quite differently, and every blockchain that came after Bitcoin. Bitcoin is basically, there is no centralized legal entity, and there are no legal contracts. The code regulates the terms of all the rules of the transactions of how the network participants are supposed to interact with each other, and the code is designed in a way that is fault tolerant and attack resistant, which means that it makes sure that even if part of the network doesn't work or is attacked or starts to not verify transactions in a correct way, the system integrity will still be maintained. And that is very, very important, and for that we do need actually the token. So nowadays, people who are not very acquainted with blockchain, they reduce Bitcoin, for example, or Ether, or any other cryptocurrency that is a native token, only to the currency aspect. But that's one of three, I would say, three aspects. One is actually the currency aspect. Bitcoin is money, but it's peer-to-peer money without banks or any other trusted third party in between. So yes, that's it. But it's also the fuel of the network. In the case of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is used to pay for transaction fees. When somebody sends money from A to B. In the case of Ethereum, Ether is the fuel of the network that you use to pay for computing power. In the case of, let's say, SIA, the SIA coin is the fuel of the network that you use for paying for file storage. And the third component is kind of the speculation aspect or economic aspect, let's say, network economies. So the economic incentive mechanism is designed in a way that every stakeholder, it assumes that every stakeholder is aligned around economic interests, and it's designed in a way that every stakeholder has benefits, gets rewarded with a native token when performing transactions in the network. And so the theory is that the better individual performance, the better network performance. The more people adopt the network, the higher the value based on supply and demand of the network token. So, as I said, Bitcoin was the first in a series of tokens. The Bitcoin code was open source. Anyone could take it, download it, and modify it. And since Bitcoin, we've had hundreds, if not thousands, of different cryptocurrencies emerge that try to be a better, faster, more anonymous Bitcoin. And one of the biggest evolutions in this space was with Ethereum, because Ethereum came along and said, let's take the idea of blockchain, decouple the idea of the smart contract from it, and they created like this decentralized world computer where anyone can now create their own token, let's say, on top of it, at a much lower transaction costs or investment costs than before. And this has sparked, over the last 2 years, I would say, this rise of ICOs. But with a coin offering, you have to ask yourself, what is the role of a token? Now, it's really hard to start to explain what a token is in this new type of economy. With trying using old words for a new economy is a bit difficult. I can't go into details right now, but basically we distinguish between usage tokens, work tokens, and asset-backed tokens. The only thing I can say right now is that they're very, very different types of tokens with different properties and different use cases, or used on different levels of a blockchain, or different types of blockchains even. Another way to distinguish tokens is looking at the technology stack. For example, the Ethereum technology stack, we have the internet, that's the base layer. Then you have the Ethereum blockchain layer with its different parts of the technology stack. And Ether is the native token of the Ethereum blockchain, which is part of the incentive mechanism to allow that this disparate group of people are aligned around the same interests. Now, Ethereum was is so revolutionary because it allows us to have this application layer with relatively simple programming skills. You can now build decentralized application tokens that have their own app token. And if you look at all the ICOs that happened over the last few months, these tokens have very, very different properties. Some of them, I would dare to say, don't have a property at all. So right now we're in a super hype phase, but if you ever want to invest into a token or design your own token, you need to understand what the role of your token is. So to wrap it up, we can say that in the Web 2, and well, many of you still are in the Web 2, right? So you write a business plan, then you have your elevator pitch in case you get introduced personally to one of these investors, and you can pitch your idea to them, and there are a few institutions that might give you money, and if they give you money, it's fiat currency. Now in the Web 3, what has become a standard for blockchain-based projects, you write a technical white paper, it's usually very technical, and you publish it in your website, you communicate over various Web 2 social media channels, and with other developers, with potential investors. Your audience is everyone, and you issue a token and get money for it. People say it's similar to IPOs. In most cases, it hasn't been similar to IPOs. In most cases, it's much more similar to crowdfunding, because in most cases of the ICOs we've seen so far, you don't get a stake in a company, because there is no such thing as a company. You get a stake in the network. The only probably ICO that was very similar to an IPO was in fact the DAO, where I was a curator. It doesn't exist anymore, so I'm not a curator anymore. That really was the DAO tried to be a decentralized investment fund on the Ethereum blockchain, and if you held the DAO token, you had voting rights and you had like a proportional stake in the system. Most ICOs are not designed like this, so it's more crowdfunding. Very important to understand, we have lack of standards. Every ICO is still designed in a very, very different way, basically because of this lack of standards. It's not regulated, and there's no community standards yet. Every ICO is different, and it depends. It's up to the discretion of the team designing the ICO and the role of the token, how this ICO looks like. As I said, also, there is a lack of regulation. Most countries have not regulated the ICO space yet. It's not clear whether it's a currency, it's a commodity, it's subject to SEC regulations, whatever. So beware that once countries start regulating, and regulators are looking into that right now, conditions could change. Skip this. Looking at the history of ICOs, it all started in 2013, I think, with Mastercoin, and back then they thought that was really a lot of money, raising $500,000 US in Bitcoin were burned and converted into Mastercoin. Then the next big step was Ethereum. They raised 18 million and broke a record within 1 month, I believe, 18 million in US dollars. And then last year, the DAO, 150 million within 4 weeks. In Ether, converted into DAO tokens. And yeah, this year we're looking at Status Bancor from 185 million ongoing, 270 million for Status last month or a few weeks ago. And if you look at Gnosis, and I would like to go into this example before we have to stop. Gnosis raised 13 million only. But because of the way their ICO was designed, they raised these 13 million based on only 4.17% of the tokens. And they kept more than 95% of the tokens, which means that their market valuation in total at that day was 312 million. Which also means that basically the team holding these 95% plus, they're kind of a central bank. They have a lot of influence on the monetary policy of that token. If they would decide to sell off 50% of their tokens, the market value would crash. And very wisely so, they locked it up for a year in a multi-sig wallet, so people wouldn't worry about the market price crashing. So if you look into designing token sales, into designing tokens, or into investing into tokens, you have to ask yourself, in that token sale, how much percent of the tokens are actually sold in that crowd sale, because this will affect your future value, potentially, of the token sale. So to cut a long story short, and I know that you might have probably a lot of questions, yeah, we're in super FOMO mode. There is a massive hype. These token sales, by the way, they're sold out in a few minutes lately. So we're not even talking 4-week periods. Make sure that you don't burn your money by not knowing where you're investing your money into. And you need to understand how you're to evaluate an ICO. We don't have time to go through this, but we have a lot of information. I'm skipping through this on our website, on the blockchain hub. We have a lot of information on what is blockchain, what are smart contracts, what is a token, crypto economics, and we also started developing a lot of guidelines around how to evaluate an ICO and what is the role of a token. So if you have any questions, join the AMA later. I think it's in 10 minutes downstairs. And approach me or follow us and read up on the information online. Thank you.